When my daughter and son-in-law told me they had already picked out a retirement home for me, I didn't argue. I didn't shout, didn't throw them out of my house. I simply nodded, sipped my coffee, and agreed to visit it sometime soon. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I have lived in this house for 42 years, and every corner of it still carries my fingerprints. The oak beams in the living room ceiling. I hoisted those myself with a neighbor's pulley back in the summer of 1978, sweating through a shirt so soaked it could have been wrung out like a rag. The brick fireplace in the den. Each stone laid with mortar I mixed by hand, my wife standing behind me, smiling in that way that made the work feel less like labor and more like love. My name is Richard Callahan. I'm 74 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and a grandfather. But if you really want to understand me, you need to know this house. Because it isn't just where I live, it's the book where my life was written. When I first bought this land, people said I was a fool. Too rocky, one neighbor warned. The soil won't hold a garden, and you'll never get rid of the rattlesnakes. But I didn't listen. I'd grown up with nothing, a father who drank, a mother who worked herself to the bone, and a childhood spent in rented apartments where we weren't allowed to so much as plant flowers on the balcony. Owning something permanent, something that couldn't be taken away by a landlord's notice, meant more to me than anyone understood. I was 28 then, newly married to Margaret, the kind of woman who could make a cold sandwich feel like a banquet just by sitting across from you. She had a laugh that rolled through a room like music, and she believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. When I said I wanted to build us a home from scratch, she didn't ask if I had the skill. She just said, then let's make it a home worth growing old in. So we did. I hammered and sawed, bled and cursed, while Margaret painted walls, chose curtains, and planted roses along the fence. We didn't have much money, but what we had we poured into this place. And when our daughter Elaine was born, I carried her across the threshold in my arms, whispering a promise into her tiny ear, that this house would always be her safe haven. Years passed. I taught history at the local high school. Margaret became the heart of our home, running bake sales, volunteering at the church, and never letting me forget anniversaries. Elaine grew up here, first as a little girl chasing butterflies in the yard, then as a teenager slamming her bedroom door after arguments about curfews. The house saw birthdays, graduations, Sunday dinners, and Christmas mornings with wrapping paper strewn across the floor. It also saw arguments, illness, and loss. But through it all, it held us. When Margaret died 5 years ago, I buried her ashes in the rose garden she planted herself. Since then, every spring when the first blooms appear, I talk to her. Maybe that sounds foolish for a man my age, but the truth is, the roses listen better than most people. The silence after she was gone nearly swallowed me. No more hum of her voice from the kitchen, no more slippers sliding across the hardwood. Just me, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. But I endured, because that's what she would have wanted. And because Elaine still needed me. At least, I thought she did. The older I get, the more I realize that people stop seeing the man you once were. They stop seeing the sweat you poured into building something from nothing. Instead, they see your wrinkles, your limp, your hesitation when you climb stairs. They see age. They see inconvenience. But I am not an inconvenience. I am a man who built this home with his bare hands. A man who stood in front of classrooms for 35 years, teaching other people's children about history and honor, even while raising my own. A man who held his wife's hand through every storm life threw at us, and kept his promise never to let his family want for anything. That's who I am. And that's why, when my daughter and her husband decided I was no longer useful, when they told me I should be packed off to a retirement home so they could sell this place, they forgot one important detail. This house doesn't belong to them. It belongs to me, to Margaret's memory, and to the legacy I have already chosen. And the day they tried to take it from me was the day I taught them a lesson they'll never forget. Elaine was my only child. My miracle. Margaret and I had tried for years before she came along. Doctors told us the odds were against us, that we should accept reality. But Margaret never did accept reality when it came wrapped in defeat. She prayed, she hoped, and she fought. And one late November night, after 36 hours of labor, Elaine arrived, red-faced, hollering, and perfect. I will never forget holding her for the first time. Her little fist gripped my finger like she already knew she had me wrapped around it. Margaret laughed, exhausted, and whispered, "She's got your stubbornness." From that moment, she became the center of my world. I worked long hours as a teacher, but I was home every evening to read Elaine bedtime stories. Saturdays were our adventure days. Sometimes it was just a walk by the river or helping me hammer nails in the garage, but to her, it was magic. She called me her hero once, around age 6, and I carried that word with me like a medal. As a teenager, she had her rebellious years, slamming doors, sneaking out to parties, rolling her eyes when I reminded her of curfews. But she always came back to me. Always ended up sitting on the porch steps with me after an argument, both of us drinking lemonade in silence until one of us finally laughed. When Margaret passed, Elaine was 37. She was the one who held my hand at the funeral, who leaned against me in the pew and whispered, "We'll be okay, Dad. I'll take care of you." That moment, that promise, was the thread I held on to when grief nearly tore me apart. But promises have a way of changing once other voices get in the room. Enter Derek. The first time Elaine brought him over, I wanted to like him. She was glowing, nervous, watching my face for approval. He had the right clothes, the firm handshake, the rehearsed charm. He complimented the house, said it had character. He asked about my years teaching. It was all too smooth. Like a man working through a checklist. Still, I gave him a chance. A father does that when he sees his daughter happy. But over the years, Derek showed his true colors. He was always chasing something bigger, a new business idea, a real estate investment, a car that would hold value. The problem was, Derek's dreams always seemed to require someone else's money. And more often than not, that someone was Elaine. I kept my distance, hoping she'd see it for herself. She was smart, independent. She'd made it through college, built a career in marketing, and survived plenty of hard times. But Derek had a way of making her feel small, like she wasn't enough on her own. I could see it in the way she deferred to him at dinners, or the way she cut herself off mid-sentence when he cleared his throat. And then there was the way he looked at this house. He'd run his fingers along the banister Margaret polished every spring and say, "You could open this place up, make it more modern." Or he'd stand in the backyard, gaze at the garden, and remark, "Prime lot." Developers would drool over this. It wasn't admiration. It was appraisal. At first, Elaine defended him. "Dad, he's just enthusiastic. He loves projects." But as time passed, her words began to echo his. My home, the place where she grew up, where Margaret and I built every memory, stopped being home in her mouth. She started calling it the property. The shift was small at first, like frost on the edges of a windowpane. But it grew. She stopped visiting as often, citing Derek's schedule or business trips. Sunday dinners became texts instead, "Too busy, Dad. Rain check." When she did come, Derek was always at her side, speaking for both of them. I'd ask about her work, and she'd glance at him before answering, like she needed permission. And then came the day in my kitchen, when she announced they'd found me a retirement home. Elaine's face was carefully composed, but her voice carried the finality of someone delivering news, not opening a discussion. She called it a safe place, a sensible decision. Words Derek had no doubt rehearsed with her. I looked at her then and tried to see the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders during parades, who once refused to go to bed without kissing both me and her mother goodnight. But all I saw was a woman repeating someone else's script. And Derek, he didn't even bother hiding his satisfaction. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, like a man who had just won an argument before it started. That was the moment I realized I hadn't lost Elaine all at once. I'd been losing her piece by piece, year after year, every time Derek whispered in her ear. But he made one mistake. He assumed age made me weak. He assumed silence meant surrender. And he assumed I hadn't been preparing for this day all along. Emily has always been different. Maybe it's because she remembers her grandmother more vividly than Elaine does now. Margaret spent hours with Emily when she was little, teaching her how to bake, how to plant tomatoes, how to thread a needle. Sometimes, I'd walk into the kitchen and find the two of them shoulder to shoulder, Margaret's hands guiding Emily's tiny ones as they kneaded dough. Emily would look up at me with flour on her nose and grin like she'd just solved the world's biggest puzzle. When Margaret died, Emily was only 11, but she handled it with more grace than most adults I knew. She didn't hide her grief. She came to me with her tears, asked me questions about heaven, and sat in the rose garden for hours as if she could still feel her grandmother's presence. While Elaine busied herself with paperwork and Derek complained about the inconvenience, Emily stayed close. Now, at 16, she's grown into a sharp, thoughtful young woman. She's got her mother's dark eyes but not her mother's distance. When she comes by, she doesn't rush, doesn't check her phone every 5 minutes. She sits. She listens. She asks about Margaret's old recipes, or about the students I taught, or about what the town looked like before the big developments. She makes me feel, not invisible. One Saturday last fall, she came over with a stack of schoolbooks. "Grandpa," she said, dropping them on the table, "can you help me with history? Mom says you used to be the best teacher in the county." I chuckled. "Your mom exaggerates. But I can try." We spent the afternoon bent over maps and timelines, her pencil tapping as she scribbled notes. Every so often she'd ask me something personal: "What were you doing when the Berlin Wall fell?" Or, "What did Grandma think about Vietnam?" It wasn't just homework to her. She wanted to know me. Later, as she packed up her books, she said quietly, "I like coming here. It feels real." "Real?" I asked. She shrugged, embarrassed. Like Mom and Derek, they're always talking about money, renovations, vacations. But here, it feels like home. Those words stayed with me. The contrast became even sharper during family dinners. Elaine insisted on hosting Thanksgiving last year. Derek carved the turkey with the precision of a surgeon, all while bragging about a new, investment opportunity that was going to change everything. Elaine nodded along, smiling that thin smile I've come to recognize as her "don't argue with him" smile. Emily sat beside me, rolling her eyes every time Derek launched into another pitch. She passed me extra mashed potatoes when Elaine wasn't looking and whispered, "Grandma would have said he talks too much." I nearly choked trying not to laugh. Later that night, as dishes clattered in the kitchen, Derek poured himself a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair. "You know, Richard, houses like yours are in demand. If you listed it tomorrow, you'd have buyers lining up. You could move somewhere easier. Something manageable." Elaine glanced at me nervously, but Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "Grandpa's house isn't just a house," she said, glaring at Derek. "It's our family. It's Grandma." The room went quiet. Derek's smile tightened. Elaine tried to change the subject, but I just reached under the table and squeezed Emily's hand. That was the first time I realized she wasn't just my granddaughter, she was my ally. Another moment came in the spring, when Derek and Elaine brought Emily over to discuss her college plans. They sat stiffly in my living room, Derek talking about financial priorities, and how family assets need to be structured responsibly. It was obvious what he meant. He wanted to use my house, my land, to bankroll whatever plan he and Elaine had drawn up. Emily sat there, arms crossed, jaw set. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Grandpa, do I get a say in this?" Because I'd rather have Sunday dinners here than some big empty house in the city. Derek snapped, you don't understand the bigger picture. Emily shot back, maybe you don't understand what family means. I didn't say anything then. I just watched them. Derek, puffed up with self-importance. Elaine, torn between her husband's voice and her own daughter's. And Emily, the only one at that table who sounded like Margaret. That was when my decision, made quietly years earlier, hardened into certainty. This house wouldn't go to Elaine and Derek. It would go to Emily. And when the time came, I'd make sure they found out in a way they would never forget. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring when the confrontation happened. I remember because I had just come in from pruning Margaret's roses. My knees ached, and there was dirt under my fingernails, but the roses were budding nicely. That garden has always been her legacy, and working it makes me feel like I'm keeping my promise to her. I'd barely set my gloves down on the counter when Elaine and Derek showed up at the door. No call, no warning. Just a sharp knock, and then the two of them standing in my entryway with smiles too polished to be genuine. Dad, Elaine said brightly, we've been talking, and we have something exciting to share with you. Derek, of course, stepped in front of her. Richard, we found the perfect place for you. Willow Creek Retirement Community. It's safe, modern, has medical staff on call. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people your age. It's exactly what you need. I leaned against the doorway, folding my arms. What I need? Elaine's smile flickered, but she pressed on. Dad, you've been here all alone since Mom passed. This house it's too much. Too big, too expensive, too hard to manage. Derek and I both think it's best if you move somewhere you can be comfortable. Derek jumped in again. And practical. This place is a money sink. Taxes, maintenance, insurance, it's just wasted cash sitting in bricks and wood. We could sell it in weeks. Use the proceeds wisely. I didn't move. I just looked at my daughter. Is that how you see it? Wasted cash. Her eyes darted away, landing on the floorboards I laid by hand decades ago. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how rehearsed it all sounded. The phrases were too neat, too clipped. Too much house. Too expensive. Practical. They weren't her words. They were Derek's. So, I said slowly, you've already decided. Elaine tried to protest. No, we want your input. But Derek cut her off with a smirk. Look, Richard. We already set up a tour for next week. We'll take you there, let you see the facilities. Once you're settled, we can handle listing this property in. That was when I put my coffee cup down on the counter harder than I meant to. The sound echoed through the kitchen. Enough. They both froze. I looked straight at Elaine. Do you remember the night your mother died? She held my hand and told me one thing, take care of you. That was her last wish. My voice tightened. Do you think she meant handing you and Derek the keys to this house so you could sell it? Elaine swallowed hard, but Derek stepped forward, puffed up like a rooster. We're not the villains here. We're being responsible. It's time to think about the future. You can't live here forever. I let a long silence stretch before I spoke again. You're right. They both blinked, surprised. I can't live here forever, I said evenly. But I'm not going anywhere just because you've decided I should. And this house? It will never be yours to sell. Elaine frowned. Dad. Understood, I said, mimicking the same clipped tone Derek had used. Then I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them standing there like two actors who had forgotten their lines. Behind me, I heard Derek mutter something under his breath, and Elaine whisper, just give him time. But they had no idea. That was the moment I knew the fight had begun. And if they thought I was just going to roll over and let them erase me, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The morning after Elaine and Derek unveiled their plan, I sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. I wasn't angry in the way younger men get angry, fists slamming, voices shouting. Age has a way of cooling rage into something quieter, sharper. Instead of fire, I felt steel settling in my chest. I spread out papers across the table, bills, tax records, insurance statements. Things Derek probably assumed I hadn't looked at in years. He thought bold meant foolish. He thought I didn't pay attention. But I do. I've kept every receipt since 1978. Every mortgage payment stub, every property tax record, every insurance policy. Margaret used to tease me for being obsessive, but she also knew it gave me peace of mind. "You're building walls inside the walls," she'd say with a smile, "so no one can tear them down." That morning, I realized those walls would be my defense now. The first call I made was to Martin Wells, my lawyer and old fishing buddy. We'd met back when I was still teaching, when Martin's son sat in my classroom. I taught the boy American history, and Martin always said I taught him how to think. Over the years, Martin and I had shared beer, bait, and the kind of trust men don't give lightly. "Richard," he said when he picked up, his voice gravelly with age. "Haven't heard from you in a while. How are the trout biting?" "I'm not calling about fish today, Martin." There was a pause. "What's happened?" "My daughter and son-in-law think I ought to move into a retirement home. They also think my house is theirs to sell." Martin snorted. "Typical. I need to make sure they never get their hands on it." "Not now, not ever." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Come by the office this afternoon. Bring whatever paperwork you've got. We'll make it ironclad." That afternoon, I drove into town with a manila folder so thick the clasp barely closed. Sitting across from Martin in his cluttered office, I laid everything out. The deed, the title, even Margaret's handwritten notes about garden expenses. Martin combed through it all with the precision of a man sharpening a blade. "You've already transferred ownership to Emily?" he asked. I nodded. 2 years ago. I wanted to make sure she had something permanent. She's the only one who still sees this house as home. Martin tapped the papers. "Smart. We'll update the trust, make it airtight. Elaine and Derek won't be able to touch it, not without Emily's say-so. And from what I remember, that girl's got a spine." I smiled. "She does. Reminds me of Margaret." By the time I left Martin's office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn. I felt lighter, but also heavier, lighter knowing I had legal walls protecting me, heavier because I knew this was just the beginning. Elaine and Derek weren't going to back down quietly. The next step was Emily. I didn't want to burden her, but she deserved to know. So that Saturday, I invited her over under the pretense of helping me fix a squeaky cabinet door. She arrived in jeans and a hoodie, her hair pulled back, looking more like the girl who used to chase butterflies than the teenager already thinking about college. We fixed the door together, her holding the screws while I tightened the hinge. When it was done, I said, "Let's sit for a minute." She gave me a curious look but followed me to the porch. We sat in the old rocking chairs Margaret insisted on buying 30 years ago. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and roses. "Emily," I began slowly, "your mother and Derek came by this week. They think I should move to a retirement home." Her eyes widened. "What? That's insane. You're fine here. This is your home." I nodded. "That's what I told them. But they won't stop. They've got it in their heads that this place is theirs to sell." She frowned. "But it's not. It's yours." I turned to look at her, really look at her. The determination in her eyes was Margaret all over again. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a folded copy of the deed. "It's yours," I said quietly. I signed it over to you 2 years ago. Her mouth dropped open. What? This house, this land, it belongs to you. Legally. No one can take it from you, not your mother, not Derek. It's my way of making sure your grandmother's memory stays with someone who values it. She stared at the paper, then back at me. Grandpa, why didn't you tell me? Because you were too young then. But things are changing now. And I need you to be ready. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the document. Then she squared her shoulders. I'll protect it. I promise. For a moment, it felt like Margaret was sitting there with us, listening, smiling. After Emily left that evening, I walked back into the garden. The roses were blooming early that year, bright red against the fading light. I knelt by the patch where Margaret's ashes lay and whispered, "Don't worry, love. They won't take it. Not from me. Not from her." The preparations had begun. The pressure didn't come all at once. Elaine and Derek were smarter than that, or at least, they thought they were. At first, it was little comments. One evening, Elaine called just to check in. I could hear Derek in the background, coaching her through every line like a stage manager. "Dad, are you eating well?" she asked. "Of course," I said, glancing at the pot of stew simmering on the stove. "I've still got your mother's recipes written down. Keeps me from starving." There was a pause, then Derek's muffled whisper. Elaine cleared her throat. "It's just, the stairs. I know they must be hard on you." "They creak more than I do," I replied. She forced a laugh, but the subtext was clear. Planting seeds. 2 weeks later, Derek dropped by uninvited. I found him standing in the driveway, eyeing the gutters. "You know," he said casually, "these look like they could collapse any day now. Dangerous for someone your age." I leaned on the porch rail and watched him. "Then it's a good thing I clean them twice a year." He frowned, then forced his salesman's grin. "I'm just saying, Richard, a retirement community would handle all this. No ladders, no chores, no risk." I didn't answer. Silence unsettles men like Derek. They thrive on pushback because it gives them something to argue against. When you give them nothing, they get nervous. That same week, Elaine brought over a glossy brochure, sliding it across the table as though it were a gift. "Dad, just look at it," she said. "Willow Creek has a pool, a library, even a little cafe. You could make friends." I studied the brochure. The pictures showed smiling gray-haired couples playing cards, doing yoga, sitting in spotless dining halls that smelled, I was sure, of bleach and boiled vegetables. "Looks nice," I said evenly. Then I folded it in half and tucked it under the stack of bills by the toaster. "But I already have friends. They're buried in the rose garden." Elaine flinched. She hated when I spoke plainly about her mother. Derek rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. "Dad," Elaine pressed, "this isn't about us. It's about what's best for you." I looked her straight in the eye. "Then why do you keep saying, we? What's best for me, or what's best for the two of you?" Her face reddened, and she busied herself by straightening the salt shaker. That night, after they left, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in Margaret's old chair. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of waiting, like a hunter crouched in the brush, watching prey step closer to the trap. They thought they were making progress. They thought each visit, each hint, each carefully phrased sentence was nudging me toward surrender. But really, all they were doing was revealing themselves piece by piece. I noticed how Derek's eyes lingered on the grandfather clock in the hallway, the antique desk in my study, the framed medals from my years teaching and coaching. He wasn't just planning to sell the house, he was cataloging its contents like a thief casing a store. I noticed how Elaine's tone changed when Emily was in the room. Softer, gentler, like she wanted to convince her daughter as much as me. But Emily saw right through it. After one dinner, she whispered to me in the kitchen, "They're circling you like vultures, Grandpa." I only smiled. Let them circle. They don't know I'm still breathing. And so, the weeks passed. More brochures, more uninvited drop-ins, more reminders about my age and safety. Derek even offered to help by taking over my bills. That earned him a laugh so sharp he didn't try again. The escalation was slow, deliberate. But I knew where it was heading. Sooner or later, they'd stop hinting and start acting. And when that day came, I'd be ready. By early summer, the hints had grown teeth. Elaine stopped asking if I'd thought about Willow Creek and started saying when. The brochures turned into scheduled appointments. Derek no longer hovered outside the house, he walked through it, running his fingers over the woodwork like a man inspecting something he already owned. One Saturday, I came back from the hardware store to find him in the backyard with a stranger, a man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down the bag of nails I'd bought. Derek grinned, too wide. "Relax, Richard. This is just a contractor friend. He's giving me an estimate for what it would take to modernize the place once." I cut him off with one word. "Out." The contractor blinked, uncomfortable. Derek sputtered, "Come on, you're being unreasonable." I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "This is my home. My land. You bring someone here without my say-so again, and I won't be asking. I'll be calling the police." The contractor muttered an apology and hurried to his truck. Derek stood there, red-faced, fists clenched like a boy caught stealing cookies. He didn't argue further, but I could see it in his eyes, this wasn't the end. That night, I called Martin again. "They've crossed the line," I told him. "Then we make the lines brighter," he replied. He updated the trust, double-checked the deed, and suggested a few additional measures. "If they try anything shady, we'll bury them in paperwork before they can blink." I spent the next week quietly organizing everything, duplicates of the deed in 3 separate lockboxes, copies of the trust mailed to Martin and another lawyer across town, even a scanned set uploaded to a secure drive Emily helped me set up. I may be old, but I'm not out of step with technology. I also started moving valuables. Not the kind Derek would think of first, not the flat screen or the silverware, but the real valuables. Margaret's jewelry box. The letters she wrote me when we were young. The pocket watch my father carried through the war. I tucked them into a safe deposit box at the bank. If Derek ever set foot in here again uninvited, he'd find nothing worth pawning. Meanwhile, Emily became my quiet confidant. I never pushed her, but she kept asking questions. "Grandpa, do they really think they can just shove you out?" "They think age makes me soft," I said. "They think silence means surrender." Her jaw set. "They don't know you very well." One evening, she came over with a notebook. "I've been keeping track," she said, flipping it open. She'd written down dates, times, and details of every visit, every comment, every piece of pressure Elaine and Derek had applied. "In case you need proof." I stared at her, struck silent for a moment. Margaret would have been proud. We sat on the porch, the sun setting over the rose garden, the air carrying that faint sweetness Margaret always loved. Emily leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "They don't scare me," she said quietly. "They shouldn't," I answered. "They're the ones who ought to be scared." Because while they were busy circling like vultures, I had been laying traps. Not just legal ones, but practical ones. Spare locks on the back door. Cameras hidden in the living room. A quiet word with Sheriff Daniels, an old student of mine who still called me Mr. Callahan whenever we met. "Anything you need, sir," he'd said firmly. "You looked out for me back then. I'll look out for you now." By July, the house felt like a fortress. Not in the way of walls and gates, but in the way of knowledge. I knew where every paper was, where every document lay hidden, who I could trust, and who I couldn't. And still, Derek pushed further. One Sunday, he arrived with Elaine and a woman in a blazer carrying a leather portfolio. "This is Jenna," he announced smugly. "She's a realtor. Just here to take a quick look." Emily was there that day. She stood up from the porch swing before I could speak. "This is my house," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're trespassing." The realtor froze. Derek's mouth opened and closed. Elaine's face went pale. I didn't have to say a word. Emily had spoken for me. As they left, Derek muttered something about ungrateful children. Elaine wouldn't meet my eyes. I watched them drive away, their car kicking up dust on the road. Emily sat back down beside me, her hands trembling slightly. "Grandpa," she whispered, "they're not going to stop, are they?" "No," I said. "But neither am I." And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting my house anymore. It was about teaching them, teaching all of them, that family isn't a word you use when it's convenient. Family is what you prove when it costs you something. And they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next month was a chess game. Elaine called more often, but her voice had changed. It wasn't the soft, daughterly tone I remembered. It was clipped, professional, like she was reading a script Derek had drafted for her. "Dad, you really should think about what's best for everyone," she said one evening. "For everyone?" I asked. "Yes. Emily's future. Our family's financial stability. You moving to Willow Creek makes sense for all of us." I almost laughed. "And what part of that is about me?" Silence. Then she sighed. "Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder than it needs to be. A phrase Derek loved to use when trying to bulldoze through objections. Sure enough, Derek called 2 nights later. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Richard, let's cut to the chase. You can't keep living in that house forever. You'll hurt yourself. The stairs, the yard work, it's a liability. We're trying to protect you." "You mean protect your investment," I said calmly. There was a pause, then his salesman voice kicked in again. "Look, it's simple. You move, we sell, everyone wins." "I didn't realize I'd been entered into a business deal," I replied. "Funny, I don't remember signing a contract." He hung up on me. The next weekend, they escalated again. I was in the living room when their car pulled into the driveway. This time, they didn't come alone. Derek brought Jenna, the realtor, again, clipboard in hand, ready to work. Elaine trailed behind, carrying another Willow Creek brochure, her jaw tight. "Dad," Elaine began, "we've given you time. But you're not being reasonable. Jenna's just here to take photos for the listing." Emily, who was sitting cross-legged on the rug doing her homework, looked up sharply. "No, she's not," Emily said. She rose to her feet, her voice steady. "She's trespassing." Derek snorted. "Don't start, kid." But Emily didn't back down. She pulled the deed from her backpack, the copy I'd given her. She unfolded it, her hands shaking only a little, and held it up. "This house isn't yours to sell. It's mine." The room went dead silent. Jenna froze mid-step, her pen hovering over her clipboard. Elaine blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't process what she'd just heard. Derek's face darkened, his smirk slipping. "What nonsense is this?" he demanded. "It's not nonsense," I said finally, my voice calm but carrying weight. "I transferred ownership to Emily 2 years ago. This house, this land, everything, it belongs to her. Legally. You have no claim." Jenna cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. I can't proceed if the property isn't in your name." She tucked her clipboard under her arm and all but bolted out the door. Elaine turned on me, her face pale. Dad, how could you? No, I cut her off. How could you? Do you know what your mother's last words to me were? Take care of Elaine. And I did. I gave you everything I could. And this is how you repay me. By trying to erase me from my own home. Elaine's eyes filled with tears, but Derek grabbed her arm. Don't let him guilt you. This is manipulation. He's just trying to hold on to control. Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp. No, Derek. You're the one manipulating. You've been trying to bully Grandpa into giving you something that was never yours. And now you're mad because you lost. Derek's face flushed red. You'll regret this, he snapped. Both of you. Emily held the deed higher, her chin lifting. No. You'll regret underestimating us. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elaine turned away, shoulders hunched, and followed Derek out. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Silence settled in their wake. Emily lowered the deed and looked at me, her eyes shining. Grandpa, did we just win? I smiled, slow and steady. Not yet. But they'll never forget this day. Because I knew Derek. And I knew Elaine, too. They weren't done. They'd try again, in some other way, with some other angle. But the beauty of it was, I wasn't done either. After they stormed out that afternoon, the house was quiet again. Emily still held the deed in her hands, her knuckles white around the edges. She was breathing fast, like she'd just run a race. I reached out and gently took the paper from her, folding it back into its envelope. You did well, I said. Her eyes darted to mine. Really? Because my hands were shaking the whole time. I chuckled. Courage isn't about not shaking. It's about standing up even when you are. She smiled faintly, but then her face crumpled a little. I don't understand them, Grandpa. Mom, she used to be so warm, so kind. And now it feels like she stopped, searching for the word. Lost, I supplied. Emily nodded. We sat together on the old sofa, the late afternoon light pouring through the curtains Margaret had sewn decades ago. I could almost picture her there with us, the 3 generations together, one present, one past, one future. You know, I said slowly, when your mom was your age, she was a lot like you. Stubborn as a mule. She once refused to come downstairs for 3 days straight because I told her she couldn't dye her hair purple before a school dance. Emily's eyes widened. Seriously? I nodded. Seriously. But she came around. She always did. Deep down, she had a good heart. She still does, Derek's just convinced her to bury it. Emily leaned against my shoulder. Do you think she'll ever come back? I let the question hang there. I didn't want to lie. I don't know. But what I do know is this, people reveal who they really are when money's involved. That's when the masks slip. And now we've seen who Derek really is. And maybe, who your mom has become. Her silence was heavy, but I could feel her thinking, weighing everything. After a while, she whispered, I'll never be like them. I promise. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. You don't have to promise. I already know. That night, I made us dinner, Margaret's old pot roast recipe. Emily sat at the kitchen table, doing her homework while I chopped vegetables. Every now and then, she'd look up and smile at me. And for a moment, despite everything, it felt like home again. But peace never lasts long when greed is in the air. The very next week, Elaine called me. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't from regret, it was from anger. Dad, she snapped, do you have any idea what you've done? Signing the house over to Emily without even talking to me. You've made things impossible. Impossible for who? I asked. For everyone, she shouted. For me, for Derek, for this family. You've divided us. No, I said quietly. You divided us the moment you tried to erase me from my own home. There was a long silence. Then she muttered, "You'll regret this," before hanging up. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail, not from Elaine, but from a law office I didn't recognize. The language was polite, but the meaning was clear. Derek and Elaine were exploring options regarding my competency and the validity of the deed transfer. Emily found me at the kitchen table reading it. Her face went pale. "They're going after you legally, aren't they?" I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Let them try. Because what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that I had been preparing for this battle long before they even thought of it. The letter was only the beginning. Within a week, the phone calls started. Not from Elaine this time, but from cousins, neighbors, even my sister in Ohio. "Richard," one cousin said hesitantly, "Elaine told us you're not well. That you've been confused lately. She's just worried about you." I could almost hear Derek feeding her the lines. Confused, not well, words chosen to paint me as senile without saying it outright. I forced a laugh. I'm sharp enough to know when someone's trying to rob me blind. But when I hung up, the laugh faded. It stung, not just that Elaine was spreading lies, but that some people believed her. That was the cruelty of it. Once a rumor of old age and confusion takes root, it grows fast, no matter how strong the tree. Emily came over the next evening. She found me sitting on the porch, the letter and a pile of notes spread out on the table. "They're saying you're incompetent, aren't they?" she asked. I nodded. "Trying to build a case that I didn't know what I was signing when I gave you the house." Her fists clenched. "That's disgusting. They're using your age against you." "Age is the easiest weapon to wield," I said quietly. "People see gray hair and assume weakness." She leaned closer. "Then let's show them you're not weak." Her fire kept me steady. Still, when Martin, my lawyer, called me into his office to prepare for the worst, the weight of it pressed heavy on my chest. "They'll try to drag this into court," he said. "But don't worry, Richard, your paperwork is solid. The emotional part is what they'll lean on. Painting you as vulnerable." I thought about Margaret, about the promise I made to her to take care of Elaine. I had never imagined taking care would mean defending myself against her. That night, I sat in my study, the clock ticking loud in the silence. I stared at a photo on the desk, Elaine at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a county fair, cotton candy in her hands. Her eyes back then were filled with trust. Where had that girl gone? The next Sunday, Elaine and Derek showed up unannounced again. Their expressions were different this time, tight, rehearsed, like lawyers themselves. "Dad," Elaine began, "we don't want this to get ugly. If you'll just undo the deed transfer, we can settle this quietly." Derek added, "Otherwise, this goes to court. And that'll be messy for everyone. Especially Emily." Emily was there, sitting at the kitchen table with her arms crossed. She looked at them with a glare I'd only ever seen once before, in her grandmother's eyes when she was protecting someone she loved. "You think you can scare us?" she said, her voice steady. "Grandpa's not crazy. He's not confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. The only ones who are confused here are you two, confusing greed for love." Elaine flinched, her eyes watering, but Derek grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "This isn't over," he snapped. "No," I said firmly. "It isn't. But the ending won't be yours to write." After they left, Emily sank into the chair beside me, her hands trembling. "Grandpa, what if they actually drag this into court?" I took her hand in mine, my voice steady. "Then we walk into that courtroom together. And we remind them what family really looks like." Because the truth was clear now, Elaine and Derek had already lost something far more important than the house. They had lost Emily. And that loss would haunt them long after the legal dust settled. The whispers reached me before the words did. At church one Sunday, I noticed the way a few heads turned when I walked in. Whispers behind hymnals. A couple of forced smiles that ended too quickly. I've been around long enough to recognize pity when I see it. After the service, old Mrs. Hanson shuffled up to me. 92, sharp as a tack, cane tapping against the tile. "Richard," she said, lowering her voice, "I hear Elaine's worried about you. Says you're forgetting things. Is that true?" I almost laughed. Mrs. Hanson was the one who misplaced her purse 3 times last month and accused the altar boys of stealing it. "I still remember the year you won the pie contest with that sour apple trick crust," I said. Her eyes lit up. "That was 1965. Exactly." I smiled. "I remember. Do you think I'm forgetting much?" She chuckled and patted my arm. "Didn't think so. Don't you worry. People talk, but I know you better." It wasn't just her. Down at the hardware store, Tom, the owner, who I once taught in 10th grade, slipped an extra pack of screws into my bag. "On the house, Mr. Callahan," he said. Then his voice dropped. "Don't let them push you around. Whole town knows you built that place with your own hands." The whole town. That phrase stuck with me. Because while Elaine and Derek tried to paint me as weak, the people who had known me for decades, students, neighbors, even the clerk at the bank, weren't buying it. One afternoon, Sheriff Daniels pulled into my driveway, his cruiser crunching on the gravel. He climbed out, his broad frame casting a long shadow, and tipped his hat. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "I've been hearing some things. Folks saying you're not in your right mind. That true?" I raised an eyebrow. "If it were true, would I still remember how you nearly flunked my class because you couldn't spell Appomattox?" He laughed, red creeping into his cheeks. "Fair point." Then he grew serious. "I don't like what your daughter and son-in-law are stirring up. Don't worry, if they try anything outside the law, I'll be here faster than you can dial." Word spread fast in small towns, and soon the tide began to turn. People didn't see a senile old man. They saw me, the teacher who'd helped their kids graduate, the neighbor who'd built his own home, the widower who still tended his wife's roses every spring. And they saw Elaine and Derek for what they were, vultures circling too close. At the diner one morning, I overheard 2 women talking at the counter. "Such a shame," one said. "That daughter of his, trying to throw him out." "Greedy husband, too," the other replied. "Can't hide that smug smile of his. Whole town can see it." When I walked past their booth, they both gave me small nods of respect. The kind that says, "We know who you are, and we're on your side." Emily noticed it, too. "Grandpa," she said one evening as we walked the garden, "they thought they could isolate you. But it's doing the opposite. Everyone's seeing the truth." "Truth has a way of shining through lies," I told her. "You just have to give it time." But deep down, I knew this wasn't enough for Derek. He wasn't the type to slink away in shame. No, humiliation only makes men like him more dangerous. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. Elaine and Derek weren't just threatening court anymore. They were filing. The showdown was no longer approaching. It was here. The certified letter sat on my kitchen table like a snake coiled and ready to strike. Emily read it aloud twice, her voice growing tighter with each line. "They're claiming you weren't competent when you signed the transfer, that Derek and Mom have concerns about undue influence." She crumpled the page in her fist. "This is insane." I poured us both tea, setting a cup in front of her. "It's not insane. It's desperate. They're cornered, and desperation makes people dangerous." Her eyes burned. "They're trying to take away everything you built. Everything Grandma left behind. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. And that's why we'll fight back. But not with anger. With truth. The next week was quiet preparation. Martin, my lawyer, came by with stacks of documents. We went over every page until my eyes blurred. "Don't worry about the law," he said firmly. "Your case is solid. Just speak from the heart." Emily insisted on helping. She printed photos of Margaret in the rose garden, of me building the house, of family Christmases where the walls of this home were filled with laughter. "These aren't just memories," she said. "They're proof this place is more than property." I even walked through the house alone one evening, touching each wall, each piece of furniture. The kitchen table scarred from years of homework. The dent in the hallway where Elaine rode her tricycle too fast. Margaret's hand-painted plate still hanging above the stove. "This is my testimony," I whispered to the empty rooms. "This house speaks for me." On the night before the hearing, Emily stayed over. We ate soup and bread in the kitchen, and later sat on the porch, watching fireflies drift above the garden. "Are you nervous?" she asked. I thought about it. "I'm not nervous about court. I'm nervous about looking at your mother and seeing what she's become." Emily leaned against me. "Whatever happens, I'm with you." I looked at her, my granddaughter, holding more courage at 16 than many grown adults I'd known. And in that moment, I knew Margaret's spirit lived on in her. The next morning, I put on my best suit. The same one I wore to Margaret's funeral. The tie was a little frayed, but it felt right, like carrying her with me into the fight. Emily wore a simple navy dress. Her hands trembled only once, when she took mine as we walked into the courthouse together. The air inside was cold, the kind of cold that makes you feel small. Elaine and Derek were already there, sitting with their lawyer. Elaine's eyes darted to me, then away quickly. Derek smirked like a man certain he'd already won. But as Emily and I sat down at our table, I felt no fear. Because I wasn't walking in as a confused old man. I was walking in as Richard Callahan. Husband. Father. Grandfather. Builder of this home. Keeper of its history. Protector of its future. And I was ready. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and polish, the kind of place where lives are measured not in minutes but in sentences. I sat at the long wooden table beside Martin, my lawyer. Across from us sat Elaine and Derek with their attorney, a younger man with slick back hair and an expression that never quite touched his eyes. Elaine looked pale, twisting a tissue in her hands. Derek sat tall, shoulders squared, a faint smirk on his lips as though the outcome was already decided. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The bailiff called the room to order, and the trial began. Derek's lawyer wasted no time. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced flair. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about protecting a vulnerable man from manipulation. Richard Callahan, though once of sound mind, is no longer capable of managing his own affairs. He was influenced into transferring his home, a valuable property, under circumstances that clearly show diminished capacity. My clients, his daughter Elaine and her husband Derek, only want what is best for him." His words rolled out smoothly, but every syllable dripped with poison. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Emily, sitting just behind me in the gallery. She gave me a small nod, steadying me. Then it was Derek's turn. He stood, voice full of false concern. "Your Honor, Richard is my father-in-law, and I care for him deeply. But lately, he forgets things. He repeats himself. He leaves burners on. We're terrified he's going to hurt himself if left alone in that big old house. We tried to convince him gently to move somewhere safe, but instead he gave away the house to Emily, who's only 16. It makes no sense. He's being taken advantage of, and we can't stand by and watch. He even had the nerve to dab his eyes with a handkerchief, as though rehearsed. When Elaine was called, her voice shook. "Dad. I love you. But you've changed. You're stubborn, and you won't listen. Derek's right, you forget things. You've been lonely since Mom died, and I just want you safe." I didn't want it to come to this, but, she trailed off, looking down. It cut me deeper than any knife could have. Then Martin stood. Calm, deliberate, his voice steady as stone. "Your Honor, what you've heard is a story, but not the truth. The truth is this: Richard Callahan is not only competent, but sharper than many men half his age. He didn't transfer his property impulsively. He did it 2 years ago, long before any supposed decline. He gave it to his granddaughter Emily, the only family member who has consistently shown him loyalty and care. This was no manipulation. This was foresight." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And today, we will prove it." First came the documents, notarized deeds, trust agreements, letters Martin had carefully organized. The judge examined them closely, nodding. Derek's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Then came witnesses. Mrs. Hanson from church shuffled up with her cane, raising her hand to be sworn in. "I've known Richard for 60 years, she declared proudly. He remembers more history than our whole town put together. If he's incompetent, then I've been dead for a decade." The courtroom chuckled, even the judge smiling faintly. Tom from the hardware store testified next. "Mr. Callahan helped me pass high school. He taught me responsibility. I see him in the shop every week, sharp as ever. He doesn't forget a thing. Well, except maybe how many screws he actually needs." Another ripple of laughter. But the moment that cracked everything open came when Emily was called to the stand. She walked up slowly, clutching the deed in her hands. She looked so small for a moment, standing in that big wooden witness box, but when she lifted her chin, her voice was steady. "My grandfather isn't confused. He isn't being manipulated. He gave me this house because he trusts me. Because he knows I'll protect it. My mom and Derek, they don't see it as a home. They see it as money. But to us, it's family. It's grandma. And if you take it away, you're not just taking walls and wood. You're erasing everything my grandparents built together." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I don't care about money. I just want to keep the promise he made to Grandma, that this house will always be family. That's all." The courtroom was silent. Even Elaine covered her face with her tissue, shoulders shaking. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, my knees aching but my back straight. I placed both hands on the rail of the witness stand and looked directly at the judge. "I built that house with my own hands," I said quietly. "Every beam, every nail. My wife, God rest her, planted the roses in the garden. We raised our daughter there. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And when Margaret died, I knew I had to make sure that home stayed with someone who understood its worth. Not in dollars. In memory." I glanced at Derek, whose smirk had all but vanished. Then at Elaine, who couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, I turned back to the judge. "I am not senile. I am not confused. I am not a burden. I am a husband, a father, a grandfather. And I will not be erased from my own home." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. The judge leaned forward, studying me for a long moment. Then she turned to Elaine and Derek. "I have heard enough," she said. "The evidence is clear. The transfer of property was valid, legal, and binding. Mr. Callahan is competent. This case is dismissed." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Emily let out a breath she'd been holding, tears spilling down her cheeks. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around me. "We did it, Grandpa. We did it." I held her tight, my own eyes damp. Across the room, Derek cursed under his breath. Elaine sobbed quietly, torn between the man beside her and the father she had betrayed. But none of that mattered now. The roses bloomed brighter that summer than they had in years. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was Margaret's way of telling me she was proud. Either way, when I knelt in the garden beside Emily, watching her clip a blossom with careful hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The courtroom was behind us now. Derek had slunk back into the shadows, muttering about appeals he would never file. Elaine stopped calling for a while. And when she finally did, her voice was softer, almost like the girl she once was. There was guilt in her tone, but distance too. Maybe one day we'd find our way back to each other. Maybe not. I wasn't bitter anymore. The fight had taken too much out of me to waste what was left on bitterness. What mattered was Emily. Every weekend, she came over to study at the kitchen table, just like her mother used to. She baked Margaret's bread with me, even when the dough stuck to her fingers. She asked me to tell her stories about when I was young, about how her grandmother and I first met, about the night Elaine was born. And she listened, really listened. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she leaned against me on the porch swing and said, "Grandpa, I don't care about the house because of what it's worth. I care because it's you. It's Grandma. It's us." I looked at her then, really looked, at the determination in her jaw, at the kindness in her eyes, and I realized the truth. Family isn't blood alone. Family is the ones who stand by you when the rest of the world calls you a burden. Family is loyalty, not convenience. Family is love that doesn't ask what it can take, only what it can give. That was Margaret's legacy. That was what she planted, not just in the garden, but in us. I placed my hand over Emily's and smiled at her. One day, when I'm gone, this house will be yours to fill with new memories. Promise me you'll keep the roses alive. She nodded, her eyes shining. I promise. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the blooms. Somewhere inside, the grandfather clock chimed the hour, steady and sure. For the first time in years, I felt steady and sure too. Because my house was safe. My legacy was safe. And my family, the part that mattered, was safe.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.